about how the institutions came up in independent India. As we all know, India was under the colonial regime, and before that India was under the rule of the princely rulers. So in 150 years of British colonial rule, especially after 1857, when we had this kind of a introduction of the several legislative measures which were introduced by the British, and especially I can mention 1909, 1919 and 1935 Government of India Acts. So all these legislative measures and the resolutions passed by the Congress, like Nehru Report 1928, Karachi Resolution 1931, and also the debate in the Constituent Assembly, all these things are focused in this module. We all know that the first issue which we take up in this module is about what kind of government India was going to have, whether it was going to be parliamentary form of government, or it was going to be a presidential form of government, or was it going to be a decentralized model of governance on the line of the Gandhian philosophy. Then there was also the Muslim League members' viewpoint who left after the creation of Pakistan. They were of the opinion that we should have followed in India, independent India, Swiss model of executive. So all these debates were going on, and there you find that ultimately the constitution makers settled for British parliamentary system as the model to be adopted in India with certain modifications. And from there, this module refers to another aspect of the debate, and that was with regard to the office of the president, power and position of the president of India. And this debate emerged because of the contentious discussion between Nehru and Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, as the first president of India, had his own view about the office of the president. He refused to accept that the Indian president was just like the British monarch, that he would be just like a ceremonial head of the government and he would be abiding by the advice of the Council of Ministers. On the other hand, Pandit Nehru was of the opinion, and he was reading the Constitution, Article 74, in such a manner that according to him, the president was bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers. So ultimately, the matter was referred to the then Attorney General, as we would see his utterances in this module, that he was of the opinion that the president should go by the advice of the Council of Ministers. Then there was another issue which was also very contentious, and that was with regard to the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. We all know that Sardar Patel had a firm control over the organization, and he was the choice of Congress Working Committee to become the Prime Minister, but it was Gandhi's intervention in 1946 that ultimately Nehru was chosen as the prime ministerial candidate for the Congress party. So because of his control over the organizational setup, Patel was of the opinion that the ministers should be allowed to have complete autonomy in their ministry. Once a decision is taken by the cabinet collectively, the minister should be held responsible to carry out the decision. There should not be undue interference on the part of the prime minister in the working of the particular ministry. So that was not acceptable to Pandit Nehru, because he thought that the Prime Minister was heading the cabinet and the ministers were there because of the pleasure of the Prime Minister, because the President appoints a person as a minister only on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. So that was another aspect of discussion between the Patel and Nehru about the position of the Prime Minister. As we all know that after death of Patel, Nehru was able to control the organization. He was also able to establish the supremacy of the Prime Minister, so that India went on to become a cabinet form of government. There was also a debate about the All India services, whether India should have gone with the colonial civil services, Indian civil service in a new avatar called Indian Administrative Service, or India should have gone for some different kind of administrative structure. But as we know that because of the communal riots, the instability which prevailed in India at the time of decolonization, And also here you have the views of Sardar Patel, who was of the opinion that All India services were going to become the kind of a stabilizing factor, and they would present a kind of a developmental model of governance. Again, there were some debates. Nehru was not on the same page as Patel about the role of the Indian civil services. Even then, ultimately, the colonial civil services were retained. IP became Imperial Police, became Indian Police Service. Indian Civil Service became Indian Administrative Service, and more or less India adopted the same kind of administrative structure which was prevalent during the British India. So in this module we have discussed all the three aspects. As I said, the form of the government which was going to be adopted by India, the relationship between the president and the prime minister, and also the relationship between the prime minister and the council of ministers, and also about the need to retain or not to retain the All India services. First, let us take Constituent Assembly of India. What were the alternatives before the Constituent Assembly of India, and how did it go about it? The Constituent Assembly decisions was to adopt a parliamentary form of government and not the presidential form of government, and it was a result of over 2.5 years of deliberations from the first meeting of the Congress Expert Committee in July 1946. The adoption of a parliamentary system of government was, however, never in doubt during the formulation of the Indian Constitution, though several important interventions were made in favor of alternative forms of democracy by eminent personalities like K.T. Srao and Professor Shivan Lal Saxena and other members of the Muslim League. The Constituent Assembly was of the opinion that in India, parliamentary system of the government was the best suited to the needs of the country. So when the debate came up about the form of the government, and also there was other viewpoint, and that was the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, who had envisaged a system founded on self-sufficient, self-regulated village republics based on political and economic decentralization. Gandhi's ultimate ideal was of a stateless society. He was not really votary of a centralized polity. Recognizing the need for a state that performs political function, Gandhi did concede to the establishment of a non-violent state based on the ideal that the state that governs the least governs the best. And there were followers in the Constituent Assembly like S.N. Agarwal, who basically drafted a Gandhian constitution for free India, which was indicative of the Gandhian ideas about the future India's democratic polity. During the debates on the objective resolution in the Constituent Assembly, there was neither any criticism of the omission of the Panchayat form of the government nor any mention of the subject. Members of the Constituent Assembly spoke of democracy, socialism, and the responsibilities of the legislature, but not of the necessity for an Indian form of government. The Congress Expert Committee, which was constituted on 8 July 1946, with Nehru as its chairman, to prepare the material for the Constituent Assembly, worked within the framework of the Cabinet Mission Plan, ignored the Gandhian approach, considering only institutions of parliamentary government. The Union and the Provincial Constitutional Committee, which was entrusted with the task of discussing the salient principles on which the constitutions of the Union and the provinces were to be based, too did not consider a Gandhian type of constitution. When the report of the two committees were discussed in the Constituent Assembly in July and August 1947, only a few members like Ram Narayan Singh noted the absence of the Panchayat and suggested the rectification. So basically it was only when the draft constitution was issued that the members noted the omission, and Dr. Rajendra Prasad spoke about the omission of the local self-government at the village level. But then we all know that ultimately what happened was that the panchayats were considered as a directive principle and not as a kind of enforceable feature of the Constitution of India. Gandhian like Shivan Lal Saxena was of the opinion that the conditions essential for the establishment of a parliamentary form of government did not exist in India. The parliamentary system had been successful in Great Britain due to the political and cultural homogeneity of the country and loyalty to the king and respect of the constitution, something which was ingrained in the people in a historical way. But the plurality and diversity of India, he argued, Mr. Saxena argued, encouraged the tendencies like divisive tendencies in India, and moreover the respect for constitutionalism was yet to take roots in the country, and that's why parliamentary system was not really very suitable for a country like India, which was just embarking on the journey of democracy. And the strength of the current in favor of a presidential form of government was also there, and one can see that B.N. Rao was one person who noted this. Some people, some members of the Constituent Assembly having a view about presidential form of government to be adopted in a country like India. Yet another system that the Constituent Assembly had considered was the Swiss form of the government. The members of the Muslim League strongly supported a Swiss type of executive where the ministers were to be elected individually by the legislature. But this viewpoint also, as we all know, that after the partition the Muslim League left, and so this viewpoint also did not get much attention. The framers of the Indian Constitution also had the option of adopting the Russian system. Though it was never mentioned during the debates in the Constituent Assembly, many scholars like M.N. Roy had advocated a modified form of Soviet democracy, which was dubbed by M.N. Roy as radical democracy. Though M.N. Roy was not a member of the Constituent Assembly, but there were some members in the Constituent Assembly who were also thinking on the lines of having some kind of a Soviet model of democracy. Then we have the many alternatives were considered during the debates in the Constituent Assembly, but it was parliamentary democracy that found greatest support among the Constituent Assembly members. Though all those models like the model of the Soviet democratic model in a modified form, or a Swiss form of the government, or the Gandhian model of governance, or whether India should go for a presidential system, all those were discussed, but ultimately the Constituent Assembly settled for a parliamentary form of government. Why parliamentary form of system was adopted? This needs to be explained. First, the members of the Constituent Assembly wanted to maintain continuity rather than experiment with a new system of governance. You can refer to the views of K.N. Kharju and Sardar Patel, who were both prominent members of the Constituent Assembly, that they were of the opinion that India under the British rule had followed British parliamentary institution for 150 years, and hence these had become a model which could be easily followed by the Indians without any problem if they were to be adopted. So they thought that to depart from the British parliamentary system at the time of decolonization would be really disastrous for a country like India. The Indian political leadership also had a long, relatively successful experience with representative government as introduced by the British during the colonial period. They were associated with local self-government since the late 19th century. The Indian Council Act of 1909 had provided for a kind of autonomous rule. Then we had this Government of India Act 1919, and then the Government of India Act 1935. They all have tried to result in a gradual manner establishment of a partially responsible executive and a gradually expanding legislature. In fact, on the basis of 1935 Act, we all know that there was election in 1937 and the provincial legislative assemblies were set up. So this was the background in which the Constituent Assembly members settled for a parliamentary form of government. Then if you refer to the view of K. M. Munshi, he opined that the character of the British Constitution had enabled the British government to tide over the many difficulties it had faced during the 150 years of colonial rule. And so between the two models, the British and the American presidential model and the British parliamentary system, he said, K. Munshi, he said that the British model had been approved by everyone, including the American constitutional experts, as really better fitted for modern conditions. Sardar Patel also considered that this was the right view. The Constituent Assembly members felt that the parliamentary form of government would provide for day-to-day responsibility of the executive to the legislature, which the principle of separation of powers on which the American system was based may result in constant conflict between the two. So, according to K. Santhanam, the executive and the legislature would be at loggerheads with each other. In addition to this, the members had greater confidence in the principle of collective responsibility and group leadership than on a single president. The emphasis laid on stability also went in favor of the parliamentary system, because in such a system where the accountability of the government to the people is indirect through the legislature, which in turn is exposed to the discipline of the party system, the citizens can sanction the government by changing the composition of the parliament, which would force a change in the cabinet. Such a system of double accountability to the legislature and to the party made parliamentary democracy much more accountable on the one hand and less susceptible to the vagaries of public opinion on the other. Last but not the least, the Constituent Assembly was in favor of direct election rather than indirect election for the head of the government, as was the case in United States of America. So basically, the parliamentary form of government was supported by most of the members of the Constituent Assembly. Now, there has been also a discussion about the office of the president. Although the Constituent Assembly approved a parliamentary system of government, it was not an exact replica of the British system. The constitution makers had modified the Westminster system to suit the peculiar requirement of the country. It may be pointed out that in the post-partition period, the need for a stable system of government that would ensure unity of the country dominated the thinking of the constitution makers. It was in this context that the constitutional provisions need to be understood. The framers of the Constituent Assembly deliberately refrained from precise detailing of the relative powers to be shared between the President and the ministers. Although there was no significant debate in the Constituent Assembly with regard to the exact role of the President, it was left to conventions. The members of the Constituent Assembly expected the Indian President to act as a friend, philosopher and guide of the government, a role similar to that of the British Crown. The minimalist wording of the Constitution and the widespread view that the President must act on ministerial advice was done to keep the government flexible, quick and more effective. Despite such implicit understanding on the role of the President, doubts regarding the exact area of the power of the President emerged soon after the commencement of the Constitution, as Dr. Rajendra Prasad took over as the first President of India. In 1951, when Dr. Rajendra Prasad became the first President of India and Jawaharlal Nehru first Prime Minister of India, the first major incongruity between the Prime Minister and the President occurred. On 18th July 1951, Rajendra Prasad sent a note to the Prime Minister in which he expressed his desire to act solely on his own judgment, independent of the advice of the Council of Ministers, while sending messages to the Parliament, giving assent to the bill and returning the bill for the reconsideration. This difference of opinion was over the Hindu Code Bill, which had been introduced in the Provisional Parliament. The Hindu Code Bill would have invalidated a large section of Hindu personal law relating to marriage, divorce, inheritance, etc. Rajendra Prasad contended that the Provisional Parliament, which was not directly elected by the people of country, did not have the mandate to make such a major enactment. Granville Austin has pointed out, Prasad's opinion on Hindu Code Bill had some moral force, because Rajendra Prasad had argued that the position of the President was not similar to that of the monarch in Great Britain. Also, he argued that the Constitution did not lay down any limitation to the powers of the President. The President was also of the opinion that there was no limitation on the powers of the President through conventions, and it was also there the President could withhold the opinion, his consent on any bill which would be passed by the Parliament. At that time there was a controversy and President Rajendra Prasad threatened to resign if the government went ahead to pass the Hindu Civil Code, and subsequently there was serious discourse regarding the powers of the President as a fallout of this dispute. And then it was pointed out that the Indian system was very much like the British parliamentary system, and so it would be very difficult for the President of India to act in his own capacity, in his independent capacity. Nehru referred the matter to N.K. Iyer, a member of the Constituent Assembly, and also M.C. Sittalwad, who was the then Attorney General of India. Both were legal experts, and they were asked to give the advice to Nehru. The Attorney General replied that by virtue of Article 74(1) of the Constitution of India, the President was required to act in all matters on the advice of the Council of Ministers. He pointed out that under the Indian Constitution, sovereignty resided in the people of India, and since the people elect the parliament from which the Council of Ministers is drawn, the ultimate authority resides with the Council of Ministers and not with the President of India. So that was the position which was taken up as a kind of legal opinion by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Iyer was also of the opinion that the President was reading every article of the Constitution which referred to the President as an article that vested powers on the President in his personal or individual capacity. It also appeared that the President read Article 53 of the Constitution independent of other articles of the Constitution, which suggested that the President under normal circumstances is bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers. Faced with these firm rebuttals, both from the Attorney General and A.K. Iyer, the President retreated. And meanwhile, the Hindu Code Bill too had been shelved and the imminent constitutional crisis was averted. A second major dispute with regard to the powers of the President took place in 1960s during his second term in the office, because in a speech to India Law Institute in November 1960, once again President Rajendra Prasad raised questions relating to the limits of the presidential powers and areas of presidential discretion. Rajendra Prasad in his speech raised four issues that were related to the boundaries of the power. One was that could the Indian Constitution incorporate the British Constitutional Conventions with regard to the position of the President? That the Constitution of India does not explicitly lay down that the President is bound to act according to the advice of the Council of Ministers. The third was that the position of the President was substantially different from that of the British monarch on account of the elected nature of the President's office. Fourth was Indian problems and the conditions were different from the British, hence they demanded unique solution. So the basic position of Rajendra Prasad was that the President of India, the position and the powers of the President of India could not be compared with the powers and position of the monarch in Great Britain. This time again Nehru threatened to resign from the office and the President had to backtrack second time. The Prasad intention in raising these issues were many. In the first place, Dr. Rajendra Prasad realized that the regality by the ceremonial nature of President's office once he occupied it. So he therefore intended to vest the office of the President with some authority and continuity, especially in case of a conflict between the center and the states or in case of a crisis. Further, he believed that the Indian Constitution could not be based solely on British conventions due to the differences between the two. Apart from the substantive issues that led to the difference between the President and the Prime Minister, James Manner also identifies several other factors that affected the relationship between Nehru and Prasad. One was the element of the personal incompatibility. They were two very different personalities. The second was that the Nehru wanted C. Rajagopalachari to occupy the office of the President, but that was not accepted. Now we refer to the Patel and Nehru interaction on the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. That was also another major debate about the institutional fabric which was adopted by India. So India had adopted a parliamentary form of government, but the Indian Constitution did not amplify the role of the executive and the relationship of the different executive organs, namely the President, the Prime Minister, the Council Minister and the Cabinet to each other. While the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister became serious matter in Nehru-Prasad interaction, the relation between the Cabinet and the Council Minister became an area of disagreement between Nehru and Sardar Patel. In 1947, after independence, Nehru tried to create a cabinet that represented the entire country, but most of his cabinet colleagues did not have a political base. Vallabhbhai Patel, who was popularly known as Sardar Patel and who became Deputy Prime Minister, he chose to have the powerful Home Ministry and States Ministry, and He sought to limit the powers of the Prime Minister and denied him the amount of freedom in the cabinet that he desired. So in many ways, Nehru and Patel functions as equals, not as like Prime Minister was acting as first among the equals. Again, just like Prasad and Nehru, there was a difference in personality of Nehru and Patel. Differences were also there in terms of outlook. Nehru had an attachment to the modern ideas of secularism and socialism, whereas Sardar Patel was very much in the orthodox Hindu milieu, and he was an organizational man and had tremendous support within the Congress party. Policy differences were also there on foreign policy issue, on the issue of integration of states. Nehru and Patel differed a lot. Then there was also this assertion of the independence, because Sardar Patel as a home minister would take many decisions without consulting Nehru or without consulting the cabinet, and this was not really acceptable to Nehru. Then Nehru was interfering in the home ministry affair as a prime minister, and that was not acceptable to Sardar Patel. There was also difference of interpretation of the powers of the prime minister between Nehru and Patel. Patel felt that the members of the cabinet were independent within their respective ministries, and their domain should not be interfered too much by the prime minister. So there was a lot of problem between the Patel and Nehru, and there was one factor which we should remember, that it was only because of the Gandhi's intervention in 1946 Congress presidential election that the Nehru was chosen as the prime ministerial candidate for the party. Otherwise, it was Patel who was basically the choice of the Congress party to become the leader. Nehru-Patel differences with regard to the institutions, one can think of like that the Nehru thought that the prime minister should have an all-powerful role, whereas the Patel said that he disagreed with this conception of the prime minister's duty and functions, and argued that accepting Nehru's interpretation of the powers of the prime minister would raise the prime minister to the position of a virtual dictator. This, he believed, would be wholly opposed to the democratic and cabinet system of government. Interestingly, 4 months in early 1949, nearly 4 months after the exchanges between Patel and Nehru over the powers of the prime minister and his relation with the cabinet, Nehru admonished B.R. Ambedkar as law minister for speaking publicly against the Congress leadership for their slowness to accommodate the scheduled caste. Patel and Nehru differed on the role of the ministers also. While Nehru contended that the Prime Minister must at all times be aware and in agreement with the decisions of the cabinet, Patel's conception of cabinet relied on the argument that ministers had the entire responsibility of implementing cabinet decisions in their own ministry, and the Prime Minister should influence only by way of consultation, not by the directive. In the 4 years that Patel was a cabinet minister, he threatened to resign at least 4 times. Interestingly, he tendered his resignation to Gandhi thrice, and once to the then party president Rajendra Prasad, but pointedly never to Nehru, who as prime minister was ultimately responsible. Both sought to resolve their different interpretation of the executive offices by referring to their political mentor Mahatma Gandhi. Death of Gandhi in 1948 brought to an end the Patel's challenge to Nehru. The powers of the prime minister following death of Patel in 1950 brought to an end Patel's challenge to Nehru, and it strengthened the position of the prime minister. And then onwards, the Nehru became the undisputed leader of the party and also the undisputed leader of the government. And he established an institution where the prime minister not only became the first among the equals, he became the most powerful person, and all the council of ministers and the cabinet meetings would be dominated by the personality and the decisions of the prime minister. Patel also had a viewpoint on the All India services, as he considered them the steel framework of independent India. He wanted to retain the Indian civil services officer because he thought that they were established on the Weberian conception of rationality and hierarchy, and they were really good to ensure continuity with the past when India became independent. So there was some kind of criticism with regard to this adopting all India civil services, with almost no modification from the colonial period. This was the viewpoint of Nehru, that it was an utilitarian logic that ensured that the founding fathers of the constitution should have preferred the continuity to change. In this module titled Perceiving and Building the Institutions in Independent India, we basically refer to the certain debates about the nature of the institutions which were going to be working in Indian democracy. And as we saw in this module, that there was a debate not only about the constitutional offices, there was also debate about the very nature of India's form of the government, whether India was going to have a parliamentary form of government or India was going to have a presidential form of government. And then there was also debate about what was going to be the position of the president in a parliamentary form of government. As we saw, that there was a lot of ambiguity about the position of the president, which was basically raised by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. No other president has really raised this issue about the position of the president. So in this, and then we also referred in this module very briefly about the discussion between, the different position taken up by Sardar Patel and Nehru about the relationship between the Prime Minister and his colleagues, cabinet colleagues. And we also referred about the Panchayati Raj system, that whether there should have been a Panchayati Raj system in India or not. And we also referred like how the different ideological groupings were there in the Constituent Assembly, and they had very different take on the future of India's polity. Some people wanted a Gandhian model, others wanted a kind of a Soviet models, others wanted, a modified version of the Soviet model of democracy. M.N. Roy view was very prominent in the eyes of some Constituent Assembly members. So different viewpoints were there, and ultimately, as we see, that these debates really clarified the matters and convinced the most of the Constituent Assembly members to settle for a parliamentary form of government. And they also had their arguments, which are the arguments have really been found quite relevant even for today. Then we also had this discussion about the relationship between the president and the Prime Minister, though it has been very well pointed out in the Constitution in the form of Article 74, 75 and 78. But there was a kind of debate, the extent of the powers of the president, to what extent the president could enjoy autonomy. And that was really, that came out very clearly in the views of the then Attorney General, and also because of this debate, for once and all, it was settled that the president has to act on the advice of the Prime Minister. Likewise, the Panchayati Raj institutions, they were considered useful, but they were not considered necessary. They were not considered as a kind of a foundational feature or foundational aspect of India's democratic polity. Likewise, the relationship between the Council of Ministers and the President, that was again a very contentious issue, and as we see that during the Patel time there was some kind of ambiguity on this question. But because of this, in this module, what we have discussed is that because of these debates, because of the exchange of the views, because of the legal experts giving their opinion on these issues, now the things became much more clear. And that was very important in the first years of India's independence, because all these institutions were new. All these institutions had been just set up. So it was very important to establish that how these institutions and what would be the relationship among the constitutional offices, like the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister, how the Council of Ministers would work, and to what extent the Council of Ministers advice would be applicable to the President, or whether the All India services, very important, permanent bureaucracy. We have the political executive, we have permanent executive. So what would be the nature of the permanent executive? This decision was a very vital decision to retain All India services in India. As we know that All India services, the permanent executive has played such an important role in bringing stability to India's democracy. So in this module, we discussed about these institutional aspects which emanate from the working of the constitution in India's democratic polity. I hope that by reading this module, you must have had a good idea about how the things were settled down with regard to the functioning of the institutions in independent India.